Hello everyone. Here is an old story that I wrote when I was doing a lot of mediumship. I wasn't really thinking about any of the futurist information and time travel or anything like that. I wasn't even involved in any of it. And of course, at that time, I did not know Peter the Insider. So I get this story from Edgar Allan Poe. And I really don't know what to make of it other than it kind of plays out, well, sort of an apocalypse, but you'll see. I don't want to ruin the story before you get there, but I'll talk about it afterwards. And you're going to see some really, really interesting things that I didn't know anything about, but there is a comment in the back of the story at the end about the quantum break, which is that video game that Peter talked about, and how that monarch is planning on doing many of these different things. And here I wrote this story in 2010 and published in 2011. And my first conversation with Peter was probably around 2015, 2016. So you can see that there's no way I would have known any of this information other than the communication aspect of it. So here's the story, and I'll talk a bit about it afterwards.
Robots, travelers from our future. They have perfect limbs and a perfect torso, all made of steel, titanium, and fine metals. The robot men of our future end have survived the course with new bodies that don't need to mend. A grommet or two can correct and make everything new. No more pain of old age, each contains the mind of an old sage. The spirit, soul, and mind have been retained. They cover all the rough terrain from a nuclear blast of fallout rain. The earth was covered, each attacked his brother. One nation blasted harder than the next. Before you knew it, the entire earth became transfixed. All living creatures began to melt. The pain, the sorrow, when all humanity let out a piercing shout. It was a nightmare to see the divine union of all people clutching and searching for their loved ones in the end of all natural existence. One stands by the ocean. One stands by a mountain. A group hold hands together for their final prayers and vows. Off to another dimension, their physical existence is taken now. The universe creates a resurrection, and they all fly with wings to the source of all that is divine. The only survivors were the planners of this demise. They hid so deep in the earth from everyone else's eyes. They created bunkers and hidden shelters with all necessary tools to survive for many generations. Yet human hearts and bodies of flesh had trouble revitalizing without the earth's elements. The lack of the sun's most nourishing ways, the natural air, and Earth's loving care were no longer available within this controlled atmosphere. When their bodies began to decay, their offspring would mutate in some ways. This was a nightmarish hell to experience instead, being reminded how they all planned their own demise in their heads. There were a few who might be considered savvy too, who survived by ingenious means, by discovering caves, volcanoes, and recesses into the deep. The guiding light from an angelic host helped them survive. These men and women were called to reseed the earth. A man, a woman, a young child preserved their lives. They learned to survive with much simplicity and absence of strife. Some people gathered together and shared their resources. Some stayed alone and thought that they were the only ones who existed. It was a very hard time with challenging resistance. In time, both good and bad men figured out how to survive. The hearts of wicked continued to search for more power and pride. They used all metaphysical means to understand their eternal spirituality and learn to understand the realms of existence not previously understood about time travel. Then one scientist said, "We should turn ourselves back in time and try to live in harmony with the way our bodies were designed. We can undo this folly and preserve our lost loved ones. A lifetime of normal existence would be far greater than eternity without them. This is a dull and empty way to live. I can't find peace or find pleasure in anything as I once did. A robotic body only helped us survive. It stripped us of all humanity, and we feel nothing inside. I am dead, though I live. A mortuary of life, a tombstone of anatomy. I breathe with flies in my mouth. I am undone, not worth the very metals that hold me intact. Scrap metal has more value than a delusional life as this. I am once dead, no, maybe twice the death, yet alive to live it over and over again. It is a sickening smell of burning flesh that fills my nostrils. It is the ringing of my ears of sirens blasting from the cavern's echoes. It is the melting of a pot and a stew of flesh from both humans and animals. I am undone. Nothing can erase the memory of my ill deeds. Destroy me if you choose. At least I would find peace with the source of all that is good." The other men observed the chief scientist resigned to his life. They thought about how they too had been disillusioned by thinking they had been victorious to survive. Another man stepped forward. "You are right. There is no rest for the weary. We have deceived ourselves into thinking that we were superior. Our intelligence, devoid of nurturing our spirits, has filled us with depravity of conscience, and now you have awakened us. Shall we search for answers that help explore other ways to undo this tragedy? Can we turn back time and reach out to the others? Can we step back into the past and save our sisters and brothers?" So they had a council and decided to vote, and found that some did and others did not. Some said it was too dangerous. Some thought they would be at risk. "Why tamper with something when we won't know if in the end we will exist?" some said. "Our lives are so remiss, and we don't feel that it would be a loss if we die in the arms of a tree-filled forest." The scientists from the council made a machine of pure molecules and made them vibrate to a rate that couldn't be seen. Then solid objects began to transform and move or displace to another location or time. The timeline shifted. They learned to control the molecules and to use their mathematical science to enter into the unseen wormholes. The quantum break was the opening gate, and they stepped on through as they watched themselves creating the wars they once knew. The council imparted wisdom, dreams, and sorrow. They worked on their nightmares to make sure they would think twice about their actions for tomorrow. What do you suppose happened from there? Would the leaders of all nations listen to these messages with care? Time will tell, as decisions will need to be made. For in our deepest wisdom, we can undo all destruction before it is too late.
Okay, so that's the story that was given me by Edgar Allan Poe. And as you can see on page 98 of the book Macabre, Short Stories and Poems from the Other Side, he mentions this one paragraph. The scientists from the council made a mission. The scientists from the council made a machine of pure molecules and made them vibrate to a rate that they couldn't be seen. Then solid objects began to transform and move or displace to another location or time. The timelines shifted. They learned to control the molecules and to use their mathematical science to enter into the unseen wormholes. The quantum break was the opening gate, and they stepped on through as they watched themselves creating the wars they once knew. So this is just a quote of the story, and the quantum break is the discussion of Paul Serene. Here we have another story regarding the Paul Serene / entity of Kevin Spacey and the agenda of scientists who call themselves the Monarch Solutions, who seem to claim to have all the ideas of everything and see themselves as a separate entity from the rest of humanity, seeing themselves as an elite group, and not knowing that within their advanced knowledge, also coupled with some of these experimental drugs that they had been working with, that brought them into a place of fantasy and science where they saw themselves as not being affected working with the quantum field. But Poe knew about this, and he told me this story. And as I said, many of these stories I thought, well, I'll just keep them to myself. I didn't think they had any purpose, and I see that, we're being revisited by this again. I just had a conversation with Peter yesterday regarding how they work with all the mathematical equations and know how to do all these different things, and all of these areas of the sciences and mathematics are areas that I am I'm not even close to being on the level of their understanding, but yet I have the consciousness to realize that all of this is really foolish, and it can be very detrimental. So let me tell you a little bit of a backstory. When I wrote this story, I had a recollection of a time period when I was probably about 18 or so, 17 or 18 years old, and I was walking down the street, and there were 3 men standing there laughing, but they looked like they're very unhappy, and I made eye contact with one of them. And of course, I was 18, 17 or so, that the individual was probably about, he looked like he was in his early 40s. We looked at each other and, kind of locked in for a bit. And they said something to me. I turned to look around him, and for some reason my friend was very emphatic and insisting that I don't say anything back. It was not anything aggressive or intimidating, but I always wonder how that connection was, and it made me think about Andronicus, and that this was connected somehow to Andronicus, because remember, there was this field of energy around them that seemed superficial in a way. It was unnatural. So now years after that go by, I kept on walking, never had a conversation. And so years go by, and I had these visions of seeing that man again and thinking that he looked odd, like there was something wrong with his hair, almost as if he was wearing like a hairpiece or something over his head. I take that back, it wasn't a hairpiece, it was more like some kind of strange hat. And it just sort of fit on top of his head, replicating hair. And I couldn't help but think that that was the same individual. And now that I look at it, I see it as Andronicus looking at me and showing me what had happened. This whole story plays out in a timeline. It doesn't necessarily mean this is our timeline. It doesn't necessarily mean we have to experience it. And it could also be that it happened and was reset in a way that we're not aware of. But many people have memories or thoughts of something like this happening and what they would do. And I know there was a big, huge craze of people wanting to go underground and create these bunkers. And I remember noticing how many elite people, really had it all set up. They had their bunkers, they knew what they were going to do, all of these terrible things were going to happen, and they were going to survive. The other people that couldn't afford these bunkers, well, who knows what their destiny was. So it very likely they would instantly be destroyed, or would have died slowly in some way or another, maybe. But scarcely would a few survive. And like in the story, there's a handful that figure it out without any pre-planned ideas. They find a way to get into these little areas like caves and so forth and survive. But still consider that the Earth's atmosphere is not livable. You just can't. You can't grow anything. You can't survive. The fallout, of course, is like the video game Fallout. Obviously, some of them do survive. They're in these little bunkers, but it's a really strange survival and very hard to maintain. And of course, the body breaks down. But these are scientists. These are pre-planned scientists who actually initiate the wars. They're involved in them. According to the story, this is why, we talk about these transhumanists, and even though they seem like they're brilliant scientists, what is their involvement in the destruction of our planet? And no one really asks them that. They seem very aloof. They seem very content with themselves, self-satisfied, having some form of intellectual elite attitude, snobbery, whatever one would call it, and yet having a sense of knowledge that there are other things going on that the masses will never know about, because if they did, their destiny would be quite different, wouldn't it? So they put on this facade, they act like everything is fine, they show all their interesting little toys, and meanwhile, this is going on in the background. So you say, well, how are they that evil? Are they actually creating wars? In some ways, many of them are already taking these, enhanced medicines that give them advanced intelligence, that also have enhanced other body parts, eventually leading up to more and more enhancements, which it creates a form of being a cyborg. Consciousness leaves. There is an absence. There's a point when the soul is disengaged and disconnects from the divine source. So they don't have the sense of feeling, what is right or wrong. It's survival. They feel that they did what they needed to do, or they figured it out, and shame on anyone else for not figuring it out. And there's a variety of perspectives that one could conclude why they would do something like this, but yet it happens. And yet it happens over and over and over again throughout our history. Only in this case, this is essentially a type of grand finale. But it doesn't have to be that way, does it? Not if we're aware of what's going on. And, many people say, well, your discussions with Peter, they're crazy, or, he tells you that you're wrong sometimes. Many times it doesn't make any sense what he's saying regarding, he'll just repeat what I had already said, or, none of it really matters. The point is that we need someone to bring in this discussion, and someone who is actually engaged in speaking to these beings and to figure out what's going on. I don't have the ego or concern of what people think, whether people think that I'm, aware or not. I just want to bring in the information, and I do believe that at some point everyone is going to have a realization of what's going on, and that we will be able to stop it. And so, here is the story. The discussions of Monarch, Mobius, and the games that they're playing, the travelers from our future, the robots, the cyborgs, the androids, and all these others that have lost their consciousness and are bringing us into this world of robots, of non-sentient beings, controlling sentient beings, which should never happen in any scenario. But there are no checks and balances, because everyone, not everyone, but the majority of the public sees something shiny, sees something brilliant, and don't think that they're worthy to speak up or intelligent enough to have conversation. And that's what they're banking on. That's what they expect, is that we'd back down, not say a word, adhere to the fact that, they are the elite and we're not. And, there's different kinds of elite. There is an intellectual elitism that's been going on in our society for a very long time. And I grew up very close to Harvard University, to MIT. I don't feel that I need to have to prove myself to any of them. They're just, assuming that they can use their diploma to prove that they are above others. And sometimes they miss the bigger picture. Most of the time they do, because they're so focused on being, perfect and superior in certain ways. We need to be superior in consciousness. We need to be able to feel confident enough to speak up and say that this is not the way the earth should be, and that transhumanism is not our future destiny, that we have everything we have right now is brilliant. It's It's brilliantly made. And we have not even reached our capacity, our brain capacity. We have not evolved in the way that we're supposed to evolve. And putting these enhancements will depreciate us, will remove the true life force essence which makes us so beautiful and wonderful. And we need to know this. We need to be confident in this. And we need to not back down when they tell us our future is being subservient to robots or the extinction of humankind as we know it today. So here is the story. Robots, travelers from our future, Mobius, Monarch, Umbrella Group, whichever one it is, it doesn't matter. They're right amongst us as we speak. So, something more to think about. I encourage all of you to be strong, and I feel the same way. Oh, and one other thing. Let's all be unified in state. We do not consent. We do not agree to this reality. And we ask to shut down, delete, uninstall any and all AI, artificial intelligence, anything that will interfere with humanity. And thank you for joining me in this revocation of this reality. Thank you, and have a good day.